Hi there, Davey Cretin here for Cretin Classics, and I'm going to do another tribute video because we lost a giant. So this is a quick tribute video to Beach Boys co-founder Brian Douglas Wilson, California boy, of course. Co-founded the Beach Boys along with his brothers, his cousins. He was born June 20th, 1942. Passed 9 days shy of his 83rd birthday, past June 11th, 2025, and I apologize for my slight tardiness with this video. He had a 63-year career from 1961 to 2024. That is a long career. Now, Brian was married twice. From 1964 to 1979, he divorced his first wife. And then he was married again in 1995 to 2024. His second wife passed away last year. So probably loss of a spouse was part of the reason that did him in, sadly. I mean, the mental state you must be in to lose your loved one of almost 30 years is not good. Now, anyone who knows music knows that he had two daughters, Carney and Wendy, and they had a band, Wilson Phillips, who scored a lot of hits in the late 80s and early 90s. His brothers Dennis and Carl were in the Beach Boys. They've both since passed. And his cousin Mike Love, of course, is still leading the Beach Boys. Now, on an odd little tangent here, I just got tickets to see the Beach Boys. I've never seen the Beach Boys in concert. I will be seeing them, and I will have a review, seeing them early July. So look mid-July for a concert review on my channel here. Brian was a singer, a songwriter. He played the bass guitar on all the early Beach Boys recordings, keyboard player, piano player, and he was known for his record producing and his skills at just basically hearing songs in his head, mini symphonies, and he created in his mind. So I know the term musical genius gets thrown around a lot, but he definitely was a titan and a musical genius, like Sly Stone, who just passed. Different types of music, but Brian Wilson was a genius, and I don't throw that word around lightly. What I learned I didn't know about is he had deafness in his right ear for most of his life, and they tried corrective surgery and it didn't work. So he was hearing these mini symphonies and these songs, and he created stuff in his head when he couldn't even hear 100%. So just phenomenally skilled musician. And the foresight he had on music, it's phenomenal. Another one who has that problem, if you guys have heard of the band Ambrosia, they had some pop hits in the late 70s, early 80s, but they started out in the mid-70s as a progressive rock band. And David Pack, the leader of the band, so to speak, and the main lead vocalist, although they all sang in Ambrosia, he was also deaf in one ear. Another guy with amazing songwriting talents, singer. And the way that these guys do that, and they overcome this, if you want to call it a disability, this issue that they have, kudos to them. David Pack is still with us. But getting back to Brian, so it's just this odd dichotomy almost that he couldn't hear properly, yet he envisioned all this great music and brought all these songs to us. I mean, the songs, I'm just going to name a few here that I jotted down. Surf City, I Get Around. Everyone knows I Get Around. Help Me Rhonda. How often do people use that phrase? Good Vibrations with a theremin in it. Amazing song. And of course, God Only Knows, which is a masterpiece from the Pet Sounds album. Brian Wilson was the first pop musician to write, arrange, produce, and perform his own material. First one ever to do that. Unfortunately, in 1964, late 1964, he had a nervous breakdown. He'd always had mental illness, as it's now called. He always had issues. Sometimes the greats have that, and they're still visionaries. So this led him to retire from the road and just focus on studio work for decades, from 1964, and I'll get to when he went back to performing live. So he was focusing on recording with the Beach Boys and doing stuff on his own. He got into an unusual relationship with his psychologist. Some would call him a Svengali, or Svengali, as Elaine would say on Seinfeld. Just wanted to bring a little bit of levity to this video. Guy's name was Eugene Landy, and in 1980 they formed this business partnership and creative partnership, and it was very weird. But in 1988, Brian Wilson actually released, while he was still working with Eugene Landy, he released his first solo album in 1988, simply entitled Brian Wilson. It's the one with the gray, blue cover, and there's a photo of half his face on it, like profile on it almost, but from straight ahead. And this is when I was working at my second record store job in Titus Oaks. And this was a big seller because Brian Wilson was releasing brand new material. And there were always, at my time in the record stores, Brian Wilson in his lifetime released a dozen solo records and a few live records also. And he always had a big cult following. A lot of guys would come out, older gentlemen who were huge Beach Boys fans when they were kids, and they knew that Brian Wilson was a genius songwriter, producer, arranger, a visionary, and they bought everything that came out by Brian Wilson. We had a lot of hardcore on Long Island, hardcore devotees of Brian Wilson. So his records always sold. We had to bring in a bunch, CDs is what I mean when I say records, and cassettes, first bunch. We always had to bring in a bunch of stock because Brian Wilson was a regular seller on Long Island. A lot of beaches on Long Island. Jones Beach, that's where I'll be seeing the Beach Boys soon. So 1988, his solo debut. 1995, there was a documentary made, and there was a soundtrack to it. It was called I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, and it was re-recordings from 1976 that he had done, but had never released. Also that year, he did his first collaboration with writer, arranger, poet Van Dyke Parks, who's very big in the orchestral pop scene. They did a record called Orange Crate Art, 95 also. So he had two records in 95. 1998, he released Imagination. 2004, Getting In Over My Head. Also in 2004, he released Brian Wilson Presents Smile. And Smile, for those who don't know, is a Lost Beach Boys album that he was working on back in the 60s, and he shelved. And there were bootlegs of it for decades, and we sold the bootlegs in my record store. But finally, in 2004, he released his holy grail among Beach Boys fans, Smile. And that was the perennial seller during my time in the record stores. That was the big seller initially, and it kept on selling. It came in used, it would sell. We'd sell it new also. So that was his biggest solo album. Without looking up any of the chart history for these, that was definitely his biggest solo album. Brian Wilson Presents Smile, his second release in 2004. The next year in 2005, Strike While the Iron is Hot put out a Christmas record. And this had a really nice cover of like silver wrapping paper with a red bow around it. I think it was green writing on it. Very attractive and eye-catching cover. Christmas album, that sold well. And my boss played that Christmas record a lot. So I've heard all of these albums because I worked with Beach Boys fans, whether it was guys that were my age, older than me, some of the younger hipsters, loved the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson. So I've heard a lot of these records, and they're all different, and they're all good because Brian Wilson, the name alone, just means quality. 2008, 3 years after the Christmas record, he released that Lucky Old Son, which again, he worked with some Van Dyke Parks poems, songs, whatever you want to call them. Very eye-catching cover again, a lot of orange slices on it, and you don't see too many orange album covers, pure orange. Eye-catching cover. 2010, 2 years later, he did his first, I guess, thematic album, you might call it. Brian Wilson reimagines Gershwin. He did the songs of George and Ira Gershwin. Another good cover because it had a black background with white piano keys, and then the sharps and flats, instead of being in black, those were all colored different colors of the rainbow. So it's an eye-catching cover because it was like the piano keys were flying off the album cover. The next year, he did another thematic album. 2011, he released In the Key of Disney. And this had like a throwback cover to the 60s because it was one of those sort of station wagons from the 60s with the open back window, and there was a surfboard sticking out. And this station wagon type vehicle, it's a brown, more brown than orange, but it was like an interesting cover because the vehicle was parked on the surf. And then you'd see the water, and instead of the sun in the background, it was the shape of Mickey Mouse's head because he was doing all songs from Disney movies, from Disney cartoons, In the Key of Disney. So you'd see Mickey's ears as the sun. 2015, the last time I was working in a record store and he released something, it was called No Peer Pressure, but it was P-I-E-R, and it was Underneath a Pier. That was the album cover, like dark blue, mysterious. You saw the pier on the top and the stanchions holding it up, the columns, whatever you want to call them. So that was the last album that came out when I was working in the record store, his 11th solo album. His 12th studio solo album came out in 2021, and I didn't know about this one. It was called At My Piano, and it's instrumental reworkings of stuff from his past, Beach Boys songs, solo songs. So on June 11th, 2025, he passed away. It was announced by his family. They didn't give the cause of death, but Al Jardine from the Beach Boys said that Brian Wilson passed from long-term COVID-19 effects, that on his last tour, he caught COVID and he just never really recovered from it. So did that do him in? We really don't know yet. It hasn't been officially announced. So I want to say rest in peace, Brian Wilson. Thanks for gifting the world with great music for decades. And even though you didn't have #1 albums with your solo records, your hardcore fans were there to buy them. I saw it firsthand working in the record stores. So my condolences to Brian Wilson's, of course, family, his friends, fans around the world, former bandmates, and anyone who's ever danced or sung or partied along with the Beach Boys song or one of his solo works. Rest in peace, Brian Wilson, and thank you for bringing us all the great music. I'm Davey Cretin for Cretin Classics. Thanks for watching, and we've lost a legend. So if you haven't dug into the Beach Boys' early career, their 70s stuff that Brian Wilson worked on, or any of his dozen solo records, or some of those live records from the 2000s, check them out. They're at the record stores, they're on YouTube, they're on the streaming services. So thank you, Brian Wilson. Rest in peace. Thanks, Davey Cretin. Bye-bye.